Are you an entrepreneur willing to grow your business but find yourself constantly scattered and overwhelmed and unfocused? Have you ever considered that you may have developed ADHD over the past few years? If so, this video is for you. We're going to be uncovering a hidden syndrome that may prevent you from accessing deep states of focus and flow states you need to get the goals you want. Welcome back. Hello everyone, Leon Castillo here, founder of Selfmastered Peak Performance Academy for Entrepreneurs. We systematize the science of peak performance to help you scale without overwhelms, distractions, and burnout. Today's video is about a hidden syndrome that some of our clients have developed that has prevented them from scaling as fast as they'd like to. Once we diagnose that, we help them reverse it so they could start having the best results in business. So hopefully this is as useful to you as it was for them. We have helped them diagnose it, treat them, but also, and more importantly, prevent it from happening ever again. But first, let's understand how we got here. We live in an attention-driven economy. In other words, behind every screen, there's the smart work of thousands of engineers that are architecting elaborate algorithms to get us hooked, to capture our attention. This is something that some authors have called limbic capitalism. Every time our attention gets hacked, a dopamine trigger gets activated and we release dopamine as a result. The dopamine, which is the goal-seeking neurochemical in the brain, basically directs our attention to that new stimulus. But if we are constantly overwhelmed over many days and weeks and months, over time, we end up developing an addictive behavior because we get desensitized to the current demands on our attention, and we need to increasingly larger dose of stimulations in order to capture that attention. That has an effect on what is called the pleasure center of the brain, the nucleus accumbens, which affects the emotional response. Long story short, behind every screen, there's the potential for addiction. And what's worse is that we cannot escape that. One, because that is how evolution shaped us as a species. We have a novelty-seeking mechanism in the brain because historically that is what protected us from predators. If we're able to spot the tiger before the tiger spotted us, we could have a chance of surviving. So this is why we seek novelty and we seek those technological inputs. We just cannot help it. But also, we are deeply intertwined with the environment. So the human species evolve with the environment. We cannot isolate ourselves and survive. So if the environment is flooded with inputs, we will receive those inputs. And if we're not ready to handle them, we will have a very hard time, which is what may be happening to you and certainly has happened to quite a few of our clients. Now, navigating this challenge is not optional. If we really want to build the business we want, we need to learn how to navigate it, how to get the most out of the technological environment in which we live in without getting hooked and addicted. Now, let's discuss what happens in the brain when you are permanently addicted. So since 1995, I think it was Linda Stone in a project, which is a consultant that worked for Microsoft, she already figured out that this continuous onslaught of inputs in our attention created something she called continuous partial attention, or CPA, which is in essence a semi-permanent vigilant state of the mind, scanning the environment for threats that will never end up materializing. In other words, we're looking for tigers every minute of the day at a subconscious level, but we don't even know it. We're constantly triggered by what happens around us, and we cannot help but to seek for that dopamine hit. This condition of perpetual alertness has an effect on our stress system because it elevates our cortisol hormone. In essence, we are more stressed than we otherwise should because our brain is telling the physiological system to be in alert in case there's a tiger roaming somewhere and we need to escape quite fast. If we sustain those high level of stress over time, that leads to serious neurological effects. In fact, now there's research research that proves that size of the hippocampus, which is a region of the brain that is involved in memory and in learning, has shrunk in the past few decades on the average human due to this technological addiction. So if you're constantly scanning for threats, constantly receiving inputs, and constantly trigger the pleasure center of your brain, over time, the deep centers of the brain will shrink, especially the hippocampus. And that leads to something that's been coined as attention deficit trait, which is this condition that I was alluding to at the beginning of the video. Unlike ADHD, which has a genetic component, attention deficit trait, it is purely caused by the environment. It is the consequence of mismanaging the inputs from the environment. And you know you have ADHD when you have, for instance, permanent irritability. So it's very easy for you to be irritable, or you're hopping from task to task without ever finishing anything, or you're constantly multitasking. You need to multitask in order to feel productive, or you just cannot hold a thought or a conversation for long enough. If you constantly feel this need of changing your mental patterns, that's because you have developed attention deficit trait. In other words, your brain seeks novelty in order to feel alive. You have desensitized yourself to the normal dopamine cycles that you need higher and higher dose of distractibility in order to basically remain functional. So attention deficit trait is caused by the environment. And if you want to solve it, we need to first address the environment and then train your brain to handle ever-increasing volumes of information. Before we go into how to solve this and how to prevent this from happening in the future, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss out of any of the videos that are coming your way to how to master your mindset, execution, and performance. So how do you solve attention deficit trait in case of having it? Basically, we have two strategies that we need to do concurrently. One has to do with reducing the negative effect of the environment in your brain, and two is training your brain to handle ever-increasing volumes of information. Let's start with reducing the inputs from the environment. The best way to go about this is first understanding what is important and what is not important. Because if you don't know what is important, then you're going to let into your consciousness, you're going to pay attention to a lot of stuff that is just random, that doesn't hold any significance in your life whatsoever. But since you haven't truly defined your priorities, you don't know those things are just not relevant. So step number one is to define a vision, to have a very clear understanding of what is meaningful and what is not meaningful. So you can automatically discard everything that is not meaningful in your life. This is how you discriminate between, when every time you go on social media and for research purposes and you end up wasting hours scrolling, well, that's because you didn't really have clarity on what actual research looks like in this context and what is just mere distraction. To discriminate between what's important and what's not important, we need to understand what is important first. So what is the vision you're going after? What is the 3-month plan that you have committed to chasing? If you don't have this, I absolutely recommend you have it, because otherwise you're not going to be able to reduce attention deficit trait in the brain, because you will be permanently inundated with inputs that you don't even know they're meaningful or not. That's step number one. Step number two is, once you are only paying attention to the things that are actually meaningful and relevant to you, pay attention to them sequentially. Yes, I'm talking about not multitasking, because every time you multitask, there's a cognitive residue that gets built into the brain. In other words, the brain has a little part of the RAM, of the processing power, lingering in the previous task. So you're constantly task switching, you are reducing the effectiveness of the brain. The brain cannot think and process information as effectively. So after reducing everything that doesn't need to be paid attention to by defining what's important, next step is work on the important stuff in the right way, so you do not create unnecessary tension. And over time, as you get better at defining your priorities and working on them sequentially without multitasking, you will notice how you pay attention to much less relevant stuff. This is the first step. But the second step, and this is albeit the most important one, is to build an elite brain. In other words, to train your capacity to handle ever-increasing volumes of information. And there's, in essence, 3 strategies that I like to recommend. First is meditation. Meditation is the single most important habit for your cognition. Meditation is the ability to return your attention to a center. And that center can be your breath, it can be a mantra, which is a phrase you repeat to yourself, it can be a sound, it doesn't doesn't matter. The point is that you sit down in a room, ideally for 10 minutes. The latest research says that about 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks is enough to induce cortical changes, to basically change the structure of your brain, is enough. You go in a room, undistracted, like totally dark, so you have no inputs, and you just concentrate on returning to your breath. What this does is that this thickens your cortex, that in essence trains your ability to handle ever-increasing volumes of information. So meditation is an absolute must in your life if you want to think like an elite performer. Then strategy number 2 is spending time in nature. This could not be simpler, but it works wonders. Have you ever had a very important decision to make? Did you make it by sitting in your desk, or did you went for a walk trying to think the problem through? Where do you think the best insights normally come from? They come from a wandering mind. Every time you spend time in nature, what the Japanese call forest bath, not only this gives you the ability to look at problems from a different perspective and get good insights, but also it reduces your stress levels, because we humans evolved outdoors. So the more time we spend outdoors, the better we can regulate our stress response. Lower stress levels, lower cortisol, more control over our neurological response. And finally, journal. Journal in order to put a little bit of order into your ideas. It doesn't matter how you journal. You don't need to get super fancy with it. There's no magic in journaling other than having the ability to reflect on what needs to get done in order to move forward effectively, in order to become better at basically triaging what's important and what's not important. So meditation, forest baths, and journaling. And this is how you prevent attention deficit trait from ruining your business. So what we just discussed, navigating attention deficit trait, which is not genetic in origin, unlike ADHD, implies reformulating your relationship with the environment, but also training your brain to handle ever-increasing volumes of information. If you find yourself constantly irritable, jumping from task to task, not able to finish a thought, that is because you have probably developed ADT. The sooner you remove that from your life, the better able you will be to access deeper state of focus that can eventually lead to better business outcomes. So if this is you, please start meditating, start journaling strategically, but also spend time in nature. Let nature do its thing. Let it reduce your stress level so you can become more able to focus. And if you want my full protocol on how to train your brain for increasing level of performance, click on this video and you will soon see how I myself do this effectively. See you in the next video.